Today we're going to learn how to begin sculpting onto our mug. The first thing that you want to do is kind of map out where you have everything in your composition. So I have this beautiful curvy line kind of going across the form. So I'm going to take the side of my needle tool and gently drag it across the surface. I'm using the side so I'm not like stabbing the surface and having clay bits pop up. I'm just going to drag it across, mapping out my mug. Just take your finger and you can smooth out any lines that, got messed up. Now I have this layered effect that I want to do for my mug. So first I need to build that layer up. There's a couple ways that I can do that. If I can find my tool for it. The first way is you can take this rubber tip tool and you can press down on the other side of that line to create this look that it's indenting. Now what you're not doing is you're not pressing a line in like this, right? That's not what you're supposed to do. You want to line the side of this rubber tool with your piece, press down on the clay and pull out. That's going to give it a really nice bumped out elevated look. Now you'll start getting these streaks in your mug whenever you do that. That's not a problem. All you do to get rid of that is take your rubber tool, and I'm always cleaning off this side to make sure it's nice and clean. And I'm going to drag my tool across it to clean it up. To smooth that out even more, I'll take just a wet synthetic brush. I'll take a wet synthetic brush and I'll just swipe across the seam here to get that nice and smooth. So always think about having perfect craftsmanship before you move on. Now, I'm not happy with the depth that I'm seeing there. I don't want to indent too far in because I don't want to compromise the structure of the mug. So I'm actually going to add a coil along this whole entire line all the way around to help it look like it's popping out even more. Now, whenever you're working on this, you guys, I'm just working on one area at a time, but if I was actually doing it without having to do it for a demonstration, I would do what I did to here all the way around the mug first. Don't work on it section by section. But to make a coil, have a little cup of water handy that you can wet your hands. Get some clay, and then pushing with the palm of your hand, push it forward and backward. And as you push forward and backward, move your hand from side to side. When your hand starts to get dry, re-wet the hand, and that's going to be putting moisture back into the clay itself. So you don't want your coil to crack. All right, so now that I have a nice size too thick, I can score and slip it onto the area that I want to have a more, puffed out edge. So once again, I would do this all the way around my mug, but because I'm just doing a short area for the demo, I'm just gonna do section by section. Remember, when you put your slip on, you dab it. Make sure when you do attach like a coil, your hands are extremely clean. They can be like clay dusty, but you want them clean. I'm gonna lay my coil directly on the edge, and I'm just gonna cut the rest of it off. But once again, I would drag it all the way around. Now that doesn't look perfect yet, right? Like we need to blend that in. So I'm gonna take my finger and I'm going to take the bottom half of that coil and start blending it into my mug. When your fingers get a little wet from this slip, dry them off. And then you guys can go back and continue pulling down the bottom half of that coil. Don't do the top half because we still want to have that round edge to show that there's a layer change. So now I just have to go back and clean it up. I'm gonna take my finger, swipe it across. This is a great time to start using those wooden modeling tools to kind of help perfect the placement of that coil to get a really nice smooth edge in there. So we don't want it looking too bumpy. To clean that out, you use your soft brush to kind of drag it across. To smooth out the bottom of that area, you take your elephant ear sponge and drag it across that way. Make sure you don't do it too many times. And you can see how cool that looks, and it just makes it look way more three-dimensional. Now, the next thing that I want to do is to start mapping out the areas behind it. I still have to put texture here, but I don't want to put texture when that clay is still wet. I mean, I just gone over it with that elephant ear sponge, so it's too wet to indent any texture in there. So I'm going to start mapping out the other areas, like these little shapes that I'm seeing on my mug here. So I have a large one here. I have a secondary area that's behind it. So I'm gonna press fairly deep here, just so it looks like it's sitting back into space more. Remember, I'm using the side of that rubber tool. Drag it across to get it to be nice and neat. And then use my soft synthetic brush to drag it around to get, and I'm trying to get my brush underneath that little crease that I made so I'm not flattening it out. And if I'm noticing areas that are a little bit too bumpy, I'll just go back with this tool and then go in with the brush. I'll do the same thing to get this last shape in that I have in this little area. Now that I'm starting to build up, I can start adding in some textures. I did modify this a little bit, this bottom design. I ended up making a really cool stamp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stamp, going to intentionally rock it into my mug. Get something cool like that. Just going to keep doing that. To get that pattern put in the mug. And so there we go, that's looking really cool. Remember, we never want to draw in detail, we always want to indent it in. So I'm gonna grab one of my wooden modeling tools to put in the line detail that I'm seeing here. That bottom, like everything should be perfectly clean on the area that you're adding in detail before you put any detail in. So always look at your craftsmanship before you do it. And if things need modified, then modify it before you go in and add that detail in. Okay, so now I can go in and notice I'm just indenting into the clay surface. I'm not dragging, just doing little indents all the way around. If your wooden modeling tool gets dirty, clean it off. That's looking pretty awesome so far. Now the next thing is I have this like half dome shape that I want to add here. So anytime you're sculpting, you want to rough out the shape of the object. Remember that the thickness of the clay from the inside of the mug to the outside should not be any wider than the thickness of your thumb. So I don't want to make this ball too big. Once I get that ball shape, I can cut it in half, so I can use two sides. And when I cut it in half, I'm going to use my fettling knife. I'm going to gradually cut through. I don't want to add my texture onto this yet because I don't want to lose the detail of the texture that I put in. Now I can't sculpt this on yet because I have this other shape that I need to indent that line on, or else it's going to be really hard for me to do that later. So that's why it's so good to not work in sections like what I'm doing. I mean, obviously I'm just doing it for the demo so you guys can see almost like a whole process, but you want to work one layer at a time. That way you can add in the fun details at the end and not have it become too cumbersome. Now you'll notice in this sketch that I have this radial pattern that goes around the middle of that circle that I'm going to be adding in. Because it's underneath this, I want to put that in now before I even score and slip my sphere on. So remember, I'm indenting, I'm not dragging in this texture. And being very intentional about my marks, making sure they're nice and clean. I'm using a wooden tool to put my textures in. Don't use a metal tool because, as we've seen, it makes just really ugly looking marks. Then the nice thing is I've already scored that area, so I'm just going to score the middle. I'll score the bottom of the circle I'm going to use. Add on my slip. Very gently place that on. Now you'll notice that that slip is going to squeeze out a little bit, so I'm going to have to clean up some of my indented marks, but that is okay. Now what I can do is I can indent this pattern that I see here. Now remember, you can use the bottom edge of like metal tools to indent in. We can start to see how this indented pattern, it's moving around with that slip there, is reflecting the circular shapes of my stamp on the bottom. So everything in my work is unified. It fits with one another. It has visual similarities. I'm not just putting random bits in there hoping that it looks good. So I can leave it like that, or I can maybe go in and add a little bit more detail. Maybe I'll go in with the finer point of my paintbrush and add in just an extra little smaller indent into every circle just to add some extra dimension there. I really like how that's starting to look. Now you'll want to clean this slip while it's still wet. So take a clean brush and just in small areas drag it across that shape trying not to get rid of that texture too much. Now, once that dries up a bit, you can go back in and re-indent along your lines. It's still a little too wet for me, so I'm just gonna stop so I don't make it messy. But like I said, once that firms up, I can re-indent my texture. And there we have a really cool looking mug design. And I would just continue doing this process all the way around my mug.